Hi, Brett and Cora, and hi to the families of Susanna, Katie, and Adam, and whoever else might be listening. This and Gary. Let's see. I got a request from Brett in China, the country of China, to read some of this book, The Fields of Home. So I'm going to read another chapter today, chapter 3. I started out, was only going to read chapter 1, but well, we'll see if they want more. And that's a picture, haying time, obviously, on the old farm, which is here in Maine. Okay, chapter 4. Whoops, I'm going to put my glasses on for this one, I think. Chapter 4 is titled, The Mowing Machine. I'd handled some pretty mean horses on ranches where I'd worked in Colorado. I was itching to get my hands on the yellow colt, but Grandfather wouldn't let me go near her. The old horse would jig in the same spot till Grandfather had the harness chest high, then he'd shy away, and Grandfather would chase after him, shouting, "Whoa, whoa, you tannel fool colt!" I'd given the bay mare a good combing and brushing, and had her harness before Grandfather cornered the yellow colt. "There, by gory, there you be, Ralphie," he sang out as soon as he'd buckled the cropper. "Colt's awful high-strung. Got to handle him gentle, elseways you'd never get a harness on him. Been spoilt by them cussed, worthless hired hands. Don't none of 'em understand a high-strung horse critter. Now you run fetch the snath inside, out of the carriage house, whilst I'm hitching the horses to the mowing machine." I'd never even heard of a snath, let alone knowing what it was. I didn't think I'd heard him right that time. "What is it you want me to get?" I asked. "Snath inside, snath inside," Grandfather shouted. "Why don't you listen when I speak to you?" Remember the picture of Grandfather, how he looked. He looked like he could be, he looks like he could be kind of stern, doesn't he? Well, let's see now. Let's turn the page. "I did listen," I said, "but I don't know what a snath is." "Great thunderation," Grandfather hollered. "Don't know what a snath is? Don't know much of nothing, do you? Didn't your father learn you nothing about farming?" "Father taught me plenty about farming, and about handling horses, too," I said, "but we never had anything called a snath." Grandfather dropped both hands to his sides and just stood there looking at me for a minute. When he spoke, his voice was as gentle as a woman's. "Gory sakes alive, Ralphie. Your old grandpa learned you how to farm. Poor boy. Eternal shame. Charlie died before he had you half fetched up. Awful good man, Charlie. Shame Mary had to lose him when there's so cussed many worthless men in the world. Now you run along and fetch the snath inside." I knew what a scythe was, all right. Father used to have one when we lived on the ranch. When I got to the carriage house, there was a scythe about like Father's, hanging on the far wall. I took it down and looked all around to see if I could find anything that might be a snath. I was still trying when Grandfather called, "Ralphie, what's keeping you? We ain't got all day." I grabbed up a broken whetstone, took the scythe, and hurried down behind the barn where he was shouting, "Whoa, whoa, whoa back," at the horses. From the corner of the barn, I could see Grandfather down on his hands and knees behind the yellow colt. The colt was the off horse, the one on the right-hand side of the pair. The cutter bar of the mowing machine was down, and if the team had started up, Grandfather would have been right in the path of the knives. I began to run, but the crooked scythe handle kept bouncing around on my shoulder. I was afraid I might startle horses, so I had to slow down. Grandfather looked up just when I was back to a walk and shouted, "What in time and tarnation ailed you, dawdling away the whole day when there's work to be done? What kept you?" "I couldn't find the snath," I called back. I was getting close enough to Grandfather. I was getting close enough that Grandfather didn't have to shout, but he snapped good and loud, "Couldn't find it, couldn't find it. What in thunder you got over your shoulder?" Of course, by that time, I knew it had to be something to do with the scythe. So I asked, "Is it part of the scythe?" Grandfather stood up on his knees with his hands drooped in front of his chest, just the way a prairie dog stands by his hole. He looked up at me as if I was some kind of a strange animal. "Gory sakes alive," he said at last. "How did ever a boy grow up to your age and know so little? Poor boy. It's a good thing Mary sent you. Your old grandpa will learn you to be a man. Snath is the handle. Besides, there's a blade that goes on it. Grandfather had the buckskin's tug wired to the single trees with a piece of rusty old barbed wire. It was so brittle that one strand had cracked where the sharp bend came, and an end 3 feet long was trailing on the ground. He grabbed the trailing piece in both fists, bent it back and forth till it broke, leaving an 8-inch spike sticking out with a barb at the end. "That won't work very well, will it?" I said. "One strand is already broken. The dragging end will ball hay up in front of the cutter bar." "Don't you tell me," Grandfather blurted, but I knew he could see I was right. As he got up off his knees, the toe of his boot caught the spike of wire, turned it up so it wouldn't drag. "Ain't nothing the matter with that," he said as he climbed up onto the mowing machine seat. "Now pass me them lines, and stand back so's you don't get hurt. Whoa, whoa, Colty." I knew quite a little about mowing machines. Father had fixed the machinery for most of the neighbors we had in Colorado, and if I wasn't in school, he'd always let me help him. He'd traded a Colt for an old second-hand mowing machine one winter. We'd taken it all to pieces, made some new parts, and put it all together again. When Father got done fixing any piece of machinery, it had always worked just as well as a new one. I hadn't had much time to look over Grandfather's machine, but in one glance I could see that it was in worse shape than the one Father got for the Colt. The cutter bar was lying in a tangle of matted clover. 2 of the knife sections were broken in half. One was missing altogether. The gears were out of mesh. There was new red rust on all of them and along the sickle blades. If the team was started with the cutter bar dragging, I knew it might tear things all to pieces. The yellow colt had begun prancing the minute Grandfather had shouted, "Whoa, Colty!" I snatched up the reins. Before I passed them to Grandfather, I said, "Hadn't I better put the cutter bar up before it drags and breaks something?" Leave be, Grandfather shouted. "Pass me them reins and stand back out of the way." I should have kept quiet, but as I passed him the lines, I said, "Hadn't I better get an oil can?" Stand back, I tell you," Grandfather snapped. Then he spanked the reins up and down, shouted, Get up. The bay mare didn't move an inch when Grandfather shouted, but the yellow colt went off like a skyrocket, and in the same direction, straight up. He danced a jig on his hind feet, and kept his front ones pawing up and down like a swimming dog's. When he came down, he rammed into the collar, and of course broke the rotten old piece of barbed wire on the whiffletree. It held just long enough to lurch the mowing machine forward a few inches and make the slipping gears scream. With his outside tug loose and the screech of the gears behind him, the old buckskin swung around like a slammed gate. He nearly pulled Grandfather off the seat, broke one of the reins, and tore most of his harness off. Instead of being mad at the yellow colt, Grandfather began yelling at me, "Tunnel fool, boy, you scared him. Why didn't you stand back like I told you? Whoa, Colty, whoa." Grandfather was still pulling on the unbroken line. When the yellow colt turned around facing him, and with the line through the ring on the harness, it only made the horse pull back harder. "Let go of the line," I shouted as I ran toward the buckskin. Shut up, get out of the way," Grandfather yelled back and kept right on pulling. The collar was hauled up tight around the old horse's jaws. He had his feet braced the way a bulldog does when he's trying to pull a stick out of your hands. I still had the side stone in my hand, and I got back of the yellow colt and was just ready to hit him and make him jump forward when the second rein broke and the buckskin sat down with a thud. His rump missed my feet by less than 2 inches, and Grandfather hollered, "Now see what you done. Why don't you keep out of the way?" Grandfather came up again, patting the old horse on the neck. Poor Colty, he said soothingly. "Tunnel and I busted the harness all to smithereens, didn't you? Ralphie, I and you better go fetch it up to the carriage house and fix it. Awful high-strung horse, the yellow colt. Did you mark any harness rivets laying round the bench? Plenty of 'em in Levi's drawers, but he gets so off I'd head up if I pry one of 'em open. Wish Levi had come home." "What does Uncle Levi do in Boston?" I asked him. "Brick mason, but he ought to be a tinker or a blacksmith. He ought to be right down near the home where he belongs. Levi ain't no more of a farmer than you be, but he can mend anything he puts his hand to, and by gory, there's plenty of stuff around here that needs mending." Grandfather turned away from the yellow colt, pointed toward a jumble of wrecked carts, buggies, and farm machines that lay half buried in a weed patch, beyond the shed built back into the hillside. Made some powerful good trades during the last 2 or 3 years. Yonder, past the sheep barn, is stuff enough to keep Levi out of mischief 4 or 5 months. Fetch a pretty penny once it's all mended up nice. Now you lug the busted harness up to the carriage house, Ralphie. I'll stand the yellow colt back in the stall so as you don't stave Nell's harness while I'm gone. Tannel high-strung horse. Can't never tell what he's likely to do. All the time Grandfather had been telling me about Uncle Levi and the machinery. The old buskin had been sitting on his haunches. His collar was pulled up behind his ears, so his head was stretched out almost straight, and the broken harness was hanging from it. I stepped up to unbuckle the hame strap and let him loose, but Grandfather hollered for me to stand back before he got hurt. Instead of unbuckling the strap himself, he began spanking the old horse on the rump with his hand, saying, "Get up, Colty, get up, get up." "He can't get up without raising his head," I said. "He'll have to unbuckle the hame strap. Stand back, don't you tell me. Get up, Colty, get up." With the last "get up," Grandfather whacked the old horse a good one, and he thrashed around until he'd thrown himself flat. All 4 legs were going as if he were trying to run a 2-minute mile right there on his side. And Grandfather was dancing in and out between the flying hoofs and shouting, "Whoa, Colty, whoa, whoa, I tell you." The yellow colt's back was toward me. I stepped in quick, yanked the end of the top hame strap, and let it slip out through the buckle. The hames flew off the collar as though they'd been pulled by a spring, and the horse flopped his head down and lay as if he were dead. Now see what you've done," Grandfather yelled at me so loud his voice went squeaky. "You killed him! You killed him!" I'd taken all the blame I could stand. Anybody who knew anything about horses could see the buskin was only sulking. He wasn't hurt a bit. I was so mad about Grandfather's yelling at me I wanted to throw something at him, and I still had the broken piece of whetstone in my hand. Before I even stopped to think, I smacked it down hard on the old horse's rump. He came to life quicker than a scared jackrabbit and scrambled to his feet. And then he stood there trembling all over, and Grandfather scolded me. Don't you never durst hit a dumb critter," he shouted. Poor Colty, poor Colty. Now fetch that harness up to the carriage house while I take him to the barn." I gathered up the harness and watched Grandfather take the old buskin to the barn, or rather the buskin take Grandfather. The yellow colt was all of 16 hands high, carried his head like a giraffe. Black spots were all he needed to make him look like one. Grandfather had the bit ring clutched in his fist, was being jerked to his tiptoes as the old horse pranced and flung his head. All the way up through the barnyard, he was dancing around, trying to keep his feet out from under the horse's hoofs, and shouting, "Whoa, Colty, whoa, you tannel fool horse." That's a picture of the yellow colt. We didn't get along much better mending harness than we had in breaking it. Father had taught me how to set a rivet tight by driving the washer down with a small nut, then cutting the tail close and tapping it evenly with a hammer. The only rivets we could find on the bench were 3/4 of an inch long, and the washers were too big to fit them. I tried to show Grandfather how to split a rivet in, spread it both ways, and tap it flat, but he snatched the hammer out of my hands. "Great thunderation," he snapped. "You're worse than Levi. Fiddle-faddled around half a day putting in a harness rivet. Stand back while I fetch it a clip." He swung the hammer higher than his head, pounded it down like a sledge, and mashed the big long rivet into a flat figure S. "There, by thunder," he said as he looked at it. "Ain't no reason that won't hold tight as a button. Now find me 3 or 4, half a dozen more of them. Your old grandpa will learn you how to be a farmer yet, Ralphie." That's the end of chapter 4. Quite a chapter, huh? Wow. Okay. Well, bye-bye, everybody.